Last one of the day. This is not a hands-on one, but definitely ask a lot of questions. We're going to go over incident management. Basically, what do you do when stuff breaks? Because it will break. It's going to be a little bit different at startups. This is more of like a larger company perspective, okay? So again, this is going to be a short one because we're pretty much out of time already. But we're going to go over what is an incident in terms of incident management. We're going to go through the incident process and root cause analysis. Now, there are a bunch of standard ways of defining this stuff. This is the one that I've encountered throughout my career. Different places you go are going to define things a little bit differently, but the general idea is going to be the same, okay? And yeah, so what is an incident? Basically, someone reports some kind of exceptional behavior. The website is slow, they can't log in, Azure is saying that there's no servers in Korea, you know, stuff like this, right? And then ideally, you form some kind of incident team, you call it the people who can fix it, and then you do some kind of investigation. Try to figure out what's wrong, what exactly is broken, why is it broken, and how can you fix it? Then you fix it, and then you analyze what went wrong, and why. Now, usually, the focus when an incident happens is restoring service. You don't really care about why it's broken. You just care about fixing it. The why comes later. Okay? So if you believe that just restarting the server will fix the problem, just restart the server. That just restore service first and then worry about everything else later. Why? Because usually your online service exists to make the company money. And every second that it's down is a second that the company is not making money. And what they're going to use to not give you a raise next year. So you want to restore service as quickly as possible. And if you can show that you make sure service is restored very quickly, then you can justify the paycheck still coming in. Okay? So there's a couple of things, there's a couple of measurements, like, what is it? Mean time to restore or mean time to resolve. It's been a little while, but they're going to track how long things are broken and then how long it takes to get them fixed. Ideally, in a larger company, they're tracking all these different time metrics to figure out how can we make sure to minimize the loss of service. Okay? So what is the process for when things go wrong? There's a bunch of different resources online that all have different processes. This is the process that I have followed in my career, and it works out pretty well. First, you identify what actually is the problem, okay? Because you may get users reporting all sorts of different behavior, and some of them may be wrong, some of them may not be understanding the behavior, this kind of stuff. So first, make sure you understand what it is that is broken. Following that, isolate where is it broken. Is it on the front end? Is it on the back end? Is it a network issue? Is it a server deployment issue? Is it a database issue, right? Figure out where the problem is. Then diagnose, okay, how can we fix this? Then repair it. And then sometimes things are not fixed instantly. For example, with the Azure stuff we were doing, right? There was a little bit of eventual consistency going on, right? Sometimes it takes time for the system to recover, especially if you're working on like a banking system or financial system. Usually those are eventually consistent systems. So even though you fix something, it may take time for the system to actually recover, okay? So you want to track things and make sure that your action to repair actually results in resolving the issue, okay? And ideally, if you're in a very, very well processed organization, you should be tracking each of these, okay? Okay, we got reports that there was a problem. Okay, we figured out exactly what the problem was. How much time from that point to this point? Okay, we isolated where the problem is occurring. We track from when we figured out what the problem is to where it's occurring. We track that time. Time to diagnose, time to repair, time to resolve. Okay? Why? Again, because time translates to dollars. And we all got to get paid. We all want to have delicious gogi together after work or whatever, right? So you go through this process to figure out how to get things fixed and to restore service as quickly as possible. But once you've restored service, remember I told you, you don't worry so much about why things are broken. You worry about that later. This is just about getting stuff fixed. After that comes the root cause analysis. I'm burning through this super fast, guys. With the root cause analysis, it's usually human. Not usually. It's almost always humans. All right. Some human messed it up. Okay. Either someone didn't follow a process, or a process wasn't defined, or someone made a mistake because they don't know how to do something, or someone made a mistake because they're careless, or maybe mistakes just happen, but there was no process to kind of review stuff and check for mistakes, these kinds of things. You can't just say, oh, the server hiccuped. Like, no. Why did the server hiccup? Was there a hardware issue? If there was a hardware issue, is it an issue with the manufacturer that we're getting hardware from? Is the hardware beyond its warranty time? Should we have replaced the hardware sooner? Some human made some mistake somewhere in the process for things to break. Computers generally don't make mistakes. And so we have to figure out where the human made the mistake, and then figure out not necessarily to blame someone, because blaming people doesn't fix anything. Blaming people just makes people feel bad. So don't blame people. Don't worry about that. And also make that clear throughout your organization, right? When you're trying to figure out what broke and why, be like, we don't care who did it. We just want to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's all it is, okay? And that's actually a very important part for building company culture. And usually, these human mistakes are solved by a process. Why do you think before you merge code, you have a human review it? That is a process to get humans to check other humans, because all humans make mistakes. Some companies have 2 to 3 people review merge or pull requests before they get merged, right? Because maybe the first reviewer might make a mistake. Each person you add to checking things reduces the likelihood of mistakes getting through. Of course, you have to balance that because reviews take time. So if you have the whole team of 10 people reviewing every single pull request, you're going to be burning a lot of time. So you have to balance all of these things. But yeah. And then also accountability, okay? When you create a new process to prevent mistakes, someone needs to own that process. It needs to be someone's job to make sure that process happens so the mistake does not happen again. Chances are, if you're managing the root cause analysis, that person might be you, but it isn't always. Sometimes if it's a security thing, it might be a security person who's in charge of it. Or sometimes if it's a like a code quality thing, maybe it goes to the engineering manager, right? But in any case, you define some kind of process to prevent the human error from happening in the future, and you make sure that someone owns that process, and you make sure that they know that they own that process. You need to make sure to communicate these things. Additionally, you need auditing, right? Just because you make someone accountable for it doesn't mean they'll actually do it. You need to have some process to make sure that the process you did actually happens, okay? Usually in larger organizations, you'll have someone whose role is to do root cause analysis, and they will go forth, and when there's downtime, when things are not broken, which ideally there should be a lot of, they go through and they check the processes that they instituted to prevent problems from happening and make sure those processes are still in place and that problems are not happening again. Ideally, someone whose job is root cause analysis, most of the time they're just running stuff and making sure that everyone's doing their job. That's the best case scenario. And then validation, you need to validate that the process has actually happened. And then you need to validate that the process has worked. Because what if you institute code reviews, right, to prevent, silly mistakes from happening, but then everyone is just, they get the notification, they go to GitHub, they click approve, and then they move on. They don't actually review the code, right? And then the problem's not solved, okay? Now, you can't just be like, oh, my engineers should be better. That's not how humans work. People don't just magically get better. You can't just be like, you should do code reviews better. Like, no, that doesn't work, okay? You have to have some kind of process, some kind of incentive, possibly some kind of punishment. Ideally, no. Ideally, incentives should drive behavior more often. They tend to be more effective anyway. And then make sure that whatever incentives, whatever processes you have put in place, they actually fix the problem. Okay, so you should try to, if possible, track the root, so you have an incident, that incident has a root cause, okay? Now that root cause may happen many times without actually causing an incident, right? Like, again, using the pull request thing as an example, maybe no one's been doing reviews, but you just got lucky and it didn't cause an incident until today, right? So then you track, okay, how often have we been doing reviews before? And now you track how often we've been doing reviews after. And then you track how often have incidents happened, right? You basically need to make sure that whatever thing you did to fix the root cause actually fixes the root cause. Does that make sense? Excellent. I know this is all fuzzy stuff, and I know I'm going kind of fast and not going into a lot of detail and using too many examples, but we don't have a lot of time. So one more thing I forgot to mention is during an incident, I talked about someone owning the root cause stuff. You also want someone in charge of the incident, okay? Because when you're trying to restore things as quickly as possible, you need someone making decisions quickly. If everyone's like debating and going back and forth, oh, maybe we should do that, so I think we should do that. Oh, I think we should do this, right? It's going to take too much time. You need to restore service as quickly as possible. If you've studied anything about leadership methods, right? You know, there's authoritarian, there's persuasive, there's consensus, all these different kind of things. When an incident happens, you go authoritarian mode. You do this, you do that, you do that. We need to fix this now. There's no time for debate. There's no time for discussion. If there does need to be debate and discussion, I will explicitly say, let's talk about this, but we need to restore service as quickly as possible. Okay? So that is how incident goes. In some companies, I've heard of the person kind of managing this called an incident manager. Stuff I've seen more recently on the internet is incident commander. I think that sounds kind of cheesy, but in terms of how things should be run, it's probably more accurate. So does that all make sense? Cool. Now, if you're in a smaller organization, a lot of this stuff is not going to be formal. Okay, you're not going to be like, oh, we are logging an incident. Start the time tracking, right? Like in a startup, obviously no, right? But having these high-level concepts of restore service as quickly as possible. Okay, now that we've restored service, how do we keep this from happening again? Because a human caused this somehow, and how do we prevent a human from causing that again in the future? That basic set of concepts right there, even in a startup, that's going to go a long way to keeping things running more smoothly and prevent you from getting those alert manager alerts at 3 a.m., right? It all ties together. So does that all make sense? Cool. So this was a short one. I could have gone longer with a whole bunch of examples and stories and stuff, but we're out of time, and I think you guys are smart enough that you don't need to be handheld through every single concept. But do you guys have any questions? Yes.
Has this ever happened in work?
No. Well, in my experience, we've had it happen exactly once. So the thing is that when we don't run a live service for our customers generally. Well, that's not entirely true. There are some things, but it's not generally things don't operate like a live service. This kind of incident management process is more useful for live services. However, my department runs an internal live service. We run a tool that's used by other team members, or by other company employees. So we had a time where during a deployment, all of a sudden we saw no data in the system, and I was like, incident manager time, right? So we got service restored within about 30 minutes, which not great, but not bad. And then we did root cause analysis the next day. And now the backend engineering manager has a process as part of the pull requests process now, and that mistake has not happened again.
What was the request issue?
I'm sorry. I made a mistake there. It was not a pull request issue. It was as part of the release process, they didn't have an explicit checklist of steps, and they basically missed a step. They forgot to do a database migration. And then when the system tried to do some kind of operation and it ended up deleting a bunch of stuff, and it caused a whole bunch of problems. So what they did was they actually made a checklist, and they made sure that that item that had been missed is part of that checklist. And now every time they do a release, they just go through the checklist. So we instituted a process for humans to not make mistakes. And it's worked beautifully so far. And they've also said that it helps releases just go faster, because they don't have to be like, wait, did I do all this? Did I do all that? They're just like, okay, check, 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 done. So there can be other positives to doing root cause analysis on things. Does that answer your question? Cool. And then I've also had, like, my job was incident management at a previous company. I mean, not 100%, but similar. So I have all the war stories, but for now, that's a pretty solid example for your question. Any other questions?
So, yeah. So basically, root cause analysis is like for management stuff.
Yeah. Well, management stuff in terms of like, you're not like writing code, right? And you're working with people and organizing processes and human systems, but it's not necessarily someone who is a people leader, right? It's not someone who is a manager of people that has to do it. It's just someone who has been given the authority to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we're fixing. So it'll often be like a product manager, or it can be just a more senior engineer. Or if you're in a startup and no one has any idea what the hell they're doing, whoever's the most confident. It depends on your organization.
So basically, if you summarize it, and once some problem arises, then you first need to solve it right?
Yeah.
And after you solve it, you start root cause analysis to prevent it arising next time.
Yes, exactly. Now, in smaller organizations, especially startups that don't have these kinds of processes, that don't have this kind of experience, they'll often just skip root cause analysis. They'll be like, we fixed it, great, let's go get drinks. And then you never talk about it again. And then it happens next week. They're like, oh, I wonder why this happened again, right? So it's very important that if root cause analysis doesn't happen, someone, probably you, needs to speak up and say, hey guys, what are we going to do to keep this from happening again? And if you ask that question, who can fault you for that? Even if you're kind of low on the totem pole, you can be like, hey manager, how do we keep this from happening again? And you can just frame it as a very innocent question. And the manager go, inside the manager might go, shit, I didn't even think about that. Oh, well, we're going to do this, right? So it's safe to ask that stuff, even if you're kind of low on the hierarchy within a company. But yeah, there was, yeah.
Because like in my previous company, we also did this one incident management. But in my previous company, we did the process, but I was actually wondering about the repercussions or the effects to the employee involved caused the incident. In some other companies, they use it as a criteria for like what you mentioned earlier, like points or bad points for salary increases.
Yeah. So in companies, in my experience, so in my experience, if it happens like once, no one cares. If an employee continuously causes incidents, yeah, then it's probably going to impact them on their performance review. Or if it's something that directly impacts the company for a lot of money, yeah, then you're not going to have a good time. For example, let's say that you accidentally delete the whole customer database. You're probably not going to be there very long, right? But if you cause a bug that prevents customers from signing up for a few hours, yeah, people might be pissed at you, but it shouldn't affect you too much, depending on like how long it's broken, all this kind of stuff. So it varies wildly from company to company. Company culture is a big important thing. We haven't really talked about the human element of stuff throughout this bootcamp because that's not the focus. But that is very important. And don't forget that you play a part in establishing company culture. If people try to blame each other, try to discourage them from that and try to encourage instead on how to fix things and how to prevent bad things from happening in the future. Just blaming people just doesn't help anything. All it does is make people feel better for a couple moments and they forget an hour later. So like blame is just not effective. But if someone establishes a pattern of bad behavior, they could be harming the team, the company, whatever. And then you have to figure out, okay, can this person's behavior be fixed? Usually no, unless it's an incentive problem. Or do we need to figure out a way to have this person not break the system, like not interact with the system in a manner where they can break it? But incentives are a big, big, big thing to think about. For example, we had one engineer at some previous work I had done where basically like didn't document anything he did and didn't really update Jira or anything. But we also never checked on what he was doing. So we started doing daily stand-ups. And it's like, hey, what did you do today? And he's like, oh, I'm going to do this. It's like, okay, we're going to check tomorrow. And then he started doing stuff. So incentives, like, you know, someone doesn't want to look like a fool at the daily stand-up by looking like they didn't do any work. So they're incentivized to actually like do some work to show that they did something more productive. It's a very simple action, very big results. So incentives are a big thing. Focus on that. Don't focus on blaming people. Does that kind of address your question? Cool. Anything else?
I have a question about the Terraform stuff.
Let's do the Terraform stuff once we finish this part, because then we can kill the stream and we can dive into that. And also, if people want to go, they can go, because we're 10 minutes over already. But I want to see, is there anything else regarding incident management that we want to cover before we end for today? Going once. Going twice. Okay. So thank you, everyone, for coming today. Do bear in mind, this is the last day we're here. Okay? Tomorrow, we're up at Gwanghwamun. We're up at Microsoft, okay? Check the event info to see how to get there, all that sort of stuff. We're on the, I believe, 13th floor. I'll be there to my friend at Microsoft and I will be there to let everyone in. Do be patient with like the projector and streaming setup, because we're going to set up everything from scratch there. We're going to try to get there early and figure it out. But if things are a little bit behind or it's a little bit slow between sessions, we ask for your patience. But beyond that, thank you everyone for coming. I hope it's been a great time. Hopefully we can figure out the Terraform issues and we can discuss stuff offline and or on Discord. But thank you everyone for coming and hope to see you tomorrow.